All right, welcome to Let's Talk Ball with Felix and Cody. Now, I texted you this morning thinking about Ben Johnson and his transition from Detroit to Chicago. Now, the biggest difference to me is obviously the archetype from quarterback to quarterback, going from Jared Goff, who's more of your stand still in the pocket guy, versus Caleb Williams is Caleb Williams. He's more in that Mahomes kind of strain, if you will. So what is that coaching point that you're going in if you're Ben Johnson, like, all right, we've got all of this where I want to use all of this wild guy that I have, all this talent, but at the same time, I'm used to coaching Jared Goff in this controlled aspect that it's worked, obviously. So what's the transition like if you're Ben Johnson going from super controlled, super tight to let's figure it out with Caleb?
Yeah, I think you move the pocket more. That's, the boot action stuff is a nice element to kind of maybe an expansion element of what he was doing in Detroit. Like, hey, let's add some boot action, which is things that they just didn't have with Goff. Goff, you're not going to want him getting out of the pocket. I even go back to Goff before he went to the Lions was considered essentially a pure drop back quarterback. If you blitzed him at all, he was going to be frazzled. He had to have a clean pocket, build in the run game. That's what they did. And then eventually he was able to get him past that kind of whatever it was, the fear of the blitz. I don't know. So I think that there's a roadmap for how you can use the skill set. You don't want to rein him in. We've seen this NFL model forever with running quarterbacks. You rein the guy in and he ends up being a shell of himself. You're going to have to get him moving. So my thing is start with a couple of boot actions, half rolls, let him get moving a little bit. And then on the back end, really work that pocket presence. And whatever he did with Goff in terms of getting him not afraid of the blitz, I think you can just give that to him as well.
Well, yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting that you bring in that point of you don't really want to rein in Caleb Williams, and there was kind of a theory floating around throughout the season of like he's kind of playing too tight, so he's not throwing as many interceptions, and you kind of want to see some interceptions in a guy like Caleb Williams, especially early on, because get it out of your system. You kind of get it through and are done with it. So with some of the moves that Chicago has made this offseason, they drafted Colson Loveling. They have Cole Kmet already, Luther Burden coming in. Where do you see some of those pieces fitting in for Ben Johnson? If it, like, obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown is a separate case and they may not have that yet, but who can fit into that for them? Is Luther Burden that guy? Does Laporta have a role, or like does that role kind of have a case for Loveland or Kmet this year? So who are those guys for Ben Johnson headed to Chicago this year?
Yeah, I'll go back to what you said earlier, kind of about that the offensive personnel that they have. I think that was part of the problem with Caleb last year is that they had these three prime receivers, right? They had the whole setup. They got Caleb, and this offense is going to be awesome. We're going to run a bunch of 11 personnel. And what you end up finding out is that it was kind of like nobody was really good. Right. And, you saw the heat map earlier that we showed of like he really was good in front of his face. Anything but beyond, he just could not push the ball down the field. So to me, what you have here is that 12 personnel style of offense that you had with Detroit. That's what you're going to get in Chicago. But you have a guy like Colston Loveland who can kind of flex out. That was the one thing that they didn't necessarily have in Detroit was like a true F that could flex out, do some different things. Laporta was great, but he's a true Y. And he's not like a George Kittle Y, right? That can really just be a dominant force on the passing. Cole Kmet had a great year, by the way. So I think you have danger there. I like Luther Burden as that slot in those 11 personnel things. Let DJ Moore kind of run that St. Brown tree. Let Rome Odunze play outside and try and blow that top off. And then have Luther Burden be that power slot in the middle, running shallow routes, running mesh routes, doing some things, get him moving. And then, hey, every once in a while we can send him deep just like they did with James Willis.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of interesting. Before we were hopping on, we were just kind of discussing some of the little nuances of this conversation. I think particularly with Luther Burden, I think we had him comp to Deebo Samuel before the draft. And I think he can kind of be that slot player where it's like, what do you want to do with him? We don't know. Well, the defense doesn't know either. So end arounds, you can put him on those boot slides like you're talking about, the little creativities that we're going to see early on with the Ben Johnson offense. I mean, we're going to see a lot of stupid stuff, frankly. I mean, that's what I would call it, because it's Ben Johnson, and we saw some of the fake plays, the bootlegs, and all that good stuff. But it's a young team. Do you see that translating itself with Ben Johnson? Like, all right, I've got these fun plays. Do you see him like, all right, first month of the season, Caleb Williams, let's figure it out. Here we go.
Yeah, and I think the running back room is where you need to start, right? Because, I mean, we have the 12 personnel. I think they have an on-ball tight end and kind of that hybrid, that H-back F in Colson in Loveland. But DeAndre Swift has kind of been a poor man's kind of do everything running back for a long time. I don't think he's going to end up being Jahmyr Gibbs, but that's going to be kind of like your Gibbs, your off tackle run, get him in the passing game. Then you have Roschon Johnson, who can be that battering ram, that Montgomery type. I like that. You know, the one thing that I don't think you will see is the extra tackle plays. Like for the past couple years, they've had the highest percentage
Dan Skipper
tackles, right? And I just don't, unless they feel like their second round pick, who is an Ozzy Trapilo, like unless they feel like he could come in and be a pulling guard or be a kick out block, you know, kind of as that Dan Skipper guy, you know, otherwise you might be able to do that. So we'll see if that is, because otherwise that adds another element. But I think, you know, I think there's something to be excited about. And I think that they have the roadmap for success. And I don't think it will look exactly like Detroit, because you don't want to do that, right? These are different players. Amon-Ra St. Brown is very unique. You know, Cole Kmet's kind of a true wide. Maybe he can fit like Laporta, but you don't. You know, one thing that you didn't have there was like an H-back or an F, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think like Luther Burden too. A lot of people will tell you, a lot of people fell in love with him in the draft process. A lot of people tell you, man, that's a huge steal. So to me, I think their ability to kind of expand that offense past what they had been doing the past couple of years in Detroit.
Yeah, taking a look at Cole Kmet here on Field Vision Pro, you mentioned that he had a very good year for Chicago. And I think that's kind of the missing point. And going back to what Chicago was last year, first month of the season, they were 2-2, and so were the Eagles. They were 2-2 too. It's just that the Eagles won every game and the Bears lost just about every game. And the big point for the Bears was that Hail Mary against the Commanders. Eberflus gets fired and whatever. So, I mean, it's what happens in the NFL. Seasons fall apart. They get away from you fast. But it's just there's too much talent on this team. And to bring the point out a little bit further to the NFC North as a whole, we saw a great year from just about every other team than what the team we're talking about here in Chicago. But Detroit loses both of their coordinators. Sam Darnold heads to Seattle from Minnesota. Green Bay don't know what's going on. Like Jordan Love, might love Jordan Love. They don't have a number one receiver, but they've got like 5 really talented guys. So like looking at the NFC North, obviously it's more competitive than most of the other divisions, but depending on what's going on with the other teams in the division, where do you see Chicago falling, especially with the added juice that Ben Johnson brings?
Yeah, to me, this is a team, this is the dark horse, right? If they can really get it together on offense. I think what they did on, Dennis Allen comes in here essentially running similar scheme. They added Grady Jarrett, and that was pretty much it. Oda Yingbo, who they also added from Indiana. So they did Indianapolis. They didn't really add anything tremendous. They didn't draft anybody that you would just be like, okay, he's going to be a game changer. Other than, Shamar Turner inside might be able to play, but he's second round pick. So I think that defensively, if everybody stays healthy, I think they clean that up. I don't think they get any dynamic. So it's really going to come down to this offense. And can you progress in year 2? We've seen this time and time again, too, of these quarterbacks getting multiple offensive coordinators in multiple years. It kind of sets them back. This will be a little bit of a reset. I would not be shocked if they struggle early and then they kind of come on late with that offense, just because I think Ben Johnson is talented. He's kind of one of those guys that came from nothing, built himself into something. The one thing that you hope is that the ego doesn't get a hold of him, and then he becomes like, well, I'm a genius. I'm a head coach of the NFL organization, which has killed many a coach that gets that opportunity. But I do think that there is a nice setup. I really think what they did in particular with getting Joe Tooney, Drew Dowman, and Jonah Jackson, building that inside presence. Because if you go, Andy Reid talks about all the time is that the interior is what actually sets your depth of the pocket, and the width is set by the tackles. So for a guy that can be kind of skittish in the pocket, you want to have basically build a great wall right there. So those guys are not getting penetration in the face of the quarterback, especially a guy like Caleb Williams who can hit the ejector button at any time. I think you saw that last year of just, I got pressure, eject, right? Eject. And then it's like they kind of know that he moves, but he's not like Lamar Jackson. So it's not like he can just do a spin move and the next thing you know, he's like 40 yards downfield, or Jaden Daniels, who is the same way. Golly, you watch a Commanders tape and it's just like, how do you defend that guy? You can have perfect coverage, perfect rush lanes. Next thing you know, he's gone. So to me, I think that that's something to look in that really, to me, is going to determine if those guys really gel inside and that offensive line plays well, then this has an opportunity because you know they're going to run the ball.
Right. I even think you kind of mentioned it from a structural standpoint, mentioning Dennis Allen, but he's a twice fired head coach now. He's probably not going to get another chance. And at least if he does, it's going to be somewhere down the road. Their offensive coordinator is 28 years old. He's probably not going to be getting a head coaching job at least for another 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 years, just because he's only a couple years older than me. So I think that from a structural standpoint, Chicago's kind of setting things in place for like, all right, Caleb, we've got our defense in place, a guy who knows how to run this defense. Our head coach is the guy who's supposed to be who's could have had like a head coaching job of his choosing over the last like 3 years. Got you an offensive coordinator that's supposed to be here for a couple years. Weapons, got you Colston Loveland. Let's go. And unfortunately in the NFL, it seems a little soon for that just because it's year 2, but let's go. It's the NFL. Let's go. We got to figure this thing out. So that's how crazy it is, but that's where we are.
You got to win before they get to the 5th year in their contract.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of the deal. Like, now with these contracts, I was having a conversation with another person about just like, why are we seeing so many different like hybrid players now in the NFL and guys being asked to do more than like even just 5-10 years ago? And it's because, look, the $60 million quarterback's coming. And that's going to be, we can inflate the cap every year, but that is such a huge number per year that it just really strangleholds what you can do. So you have to kind of build around it. And I think like what you're seeing is kind of that Chiefs model where we're going to have a bunch of blue collar guys, maybe have 1 or 2 all pro guys. We're going to pay them. We're going to make sure they're taking care of them. We're just going to kind of fit pieces, but have a really good defensive coordinator that can kind of piece things together. And then we're going to pay our quarterback, right? And then you have these others that are like, let's load up on offensive talent. We'll figure the defense out later. We got a young quarterback now, strike, or like the Bengals model of like, just pay everybody on offense, forget defense. We'll figure it out. So it's like I think the Bears are on a path where they probably have an underrated roster. It needs to get put together. Eberflus, for whatever reason, just couldn't put it together last year. And I think there was so much infighting after. I think the catalyst of it was that Commanders game. I think it just was kind of the dam broke after that. And so I think Ben Johnson, he's young. He's going to have to come up with some certain things because if you try, I've seen this too many times in coaching. If you try and just carve and copy what you did at one place to the other,
for sure,
the culture's different, the players different. It's not going to work. So you have to feed into that. I think he's smart enough just because of what they were doing in Detroit and how he was able to develop Goff. People forget Goff was terrible. Everybody was laughing at the Detroit, and then everybody quit laughing last year when it was like, oh, these guys are really good.
Well, I even think to your point about like Ben Johnson could have had a head coaching job, not just this cycle, but last cycle. So we've all known Ben Johnson is good. So every defensive coordinator has known Ben Johnson is good. They've had basically the same core, and he's still been Ben Johnson. So he's figured it out. And so you're absolutely right. If he hasn't proven it yet, hopefully he proves it now with an even more, at least traditionally talented quarterback. Obviously, Goff is he's a number 1 overall pick too, but a lot of that is attributed to what Ben Johnson and Sean McVay have done throughout his career. So I think Chicago is one of the more, just like they were last year, one of the more interesting spots, but now even more so because they have a interesting coach, and that Matt Eberflus never ever was.
Yeah. It's not. I think too. Like, to me, this is a team that if they can strike while the iron's hot, like if they can get hot, they can put it together. He does a good job gelling this. This is a team that I don't think people are really going to want to, like, if I'm in that division, I don't want them to be good. I like
Right.
looking at it. You go and you look at kind of what other people are doing in that division too. You kind of hit on it. Minnesota's going to have to figure out what it's like to play with a rookie quarterback.
Yep.
Okay. How sustainable is that defense when all you're doing is essentially just signing a bunch of veterans? Okay. Let's go to Green Bay. Is Jordan Love good? Is he great? We don't know. What are they going to do to kind of amplify? They've got the run game. What are they going to do at receiver, which is a constant deal. Defensively, they didn't really add anybody, right? So, you kind of look at it like, okay, where are they at? Standing pat. Detroit lost a bunch of brain drain. We saw what that was like for the Ravens last year on defense. It took them almost half the year to get the defense back to where they were. So, yeah, I think if there is an opportunity, it's the opportunity for Chicago to put it all together and kind of Ben Johnson to establish himself as, hey, maybe I come from the Shanahan McVay tree, but I'm just as good offensively and just as good at team.
That's also what's interesting. He is kind of grown up on this island on his own, where it's just like, yeah, everybody's McVay, Shanahan, this outside zone run scheme, and he has elements of it because that's the modern NFL. But at the same time, he's like, no, we're doing our own thing over here, and let's see if that can raise in and of itself. So very interesting there. If you agree with us, let us know in the comments. Follow us on X at FieldVisionMI, on Instagram at FieldVisionSports. As you can see just below Cody's beautiful mug there at the coach _ or whatever, you see it there. And then mine is right underneath it. And so follow us everywhere at Field Vision Sports. We love you.